This will be. Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to Senate Education on February 24th. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about literacy, health products in the schools, and the creation of a school discipline advisory council. Senator Campion is in appropriations as we speak, telling them how important literacy is and attempting to get some funding for the programs that we hope to put in place. So our first witness today is Katie Ballard. Katie is a parent and special ed parent advocate. So Katie, what would you like to say about literacy?
Good afternoon. Thank you to your committee and to Senator Campion for allowing me to speak with you briefly today on the literacy bill related to the supervisory union. I apologize because I didn't see the bill number, so I can't use the S75, but I'm assuming everyone knows the bill I'm referring to. Right in the beginning of the bill, it says the statement or purpose of this bill is to continue the ongoing work to improve literacy for all students in the state. And it continues to say this goal will require a multi-year and multi-dimensional effort requiring continued focus by the General Assembly, the administration, and school leaders. I recognize that your committee has taken a lot of testimony over the last 6 weeks on this issue. And I think that fact and the opening of that bill really want me to come here today and again express the need to have other voices involved at the table and to begin to change the status quo here in Vermont related to literacy. As a parent, I have 2 boys who have learning disabilities, dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia. My older son is in 8th grade now, and he was not appropriately identified until last year when we pushed for a Stern Center evaluation. Despite being on an IEP since kindergarten with identified learning disabilities, he received no specialized interventions or instructions until 7th grade when I pushed and advocated and requested specialized programming. As a parent, I had to become an expert in all things special education, in learning my rights, and understanding what a free and appropriate public education is, as well as all of the terminology and the steps involved in being an effective, collaborative member of my son's IEP teams. That prompted me to become a special ed parent advocate. I'm professionally trained as a special ed parent advocate. I participate on multiple committees, including our state special ed advisory panel as a parent rep. I am a member of our state decoding dyslexia group as a state lead. I also sit on several national organizations related to advocacy for special education and children with disabilities. So I come into this also supporting 27 families currently across our state and having spoken with more than 100 or 200 families in the last 2 years, most of whom are very specific to this issue. I know that you guys have taken a lot of testimony. I emailed about 3 or 4 weeks ago asking to be heard and unfortunately miscommunicated and didn't get a chance to until right before you voted, so I apologize. My biggest concerns with this bill are that it continues to allow the same voices and the same conversations to happen despite 10 years of showing that we are not making progress on this literacy crisis. When I look at Section 4, I think creating a literacy division is crucial in some structure. My concern is in all of the testimony I have listened to here and in the House Education Committee over the last few years related to this, the biggest thing that keeps coming up is about capacity. School districts having the capacity and the ability to tackle more projects, to take on more responsibility, to add more steps to the workload that they already have. And that is valid. We have amazing educators who have far too much that end up on their plates at times because there isn't anybody else really doing it. And we've also heard from the AOE that they are struggling with capacity and having the expertise to be available and to solve this crisis. So when you guys talk in section 4, 5, and 6 about creating collaborative plans or visions or adopting data collection or looking at that, and you listed specific groups that you wanted to see collaborate with the AOE, I am coming to you today, and again, I just spoke with your chair last night at like 7 o'clock. So I apologize for not having this a little bit more prepped and polished, and I look forward to coming back to testify in S75 in the future. But I would really encourage this committee to consider whether or not that collaborative group with the language included in Section 5 and Section 6 might be better looked at from a task force perspective. So in Vermont, we are one of 2 states that do not have a guidebook related to learning disabilities or dyslexia, a law related to learning disabilities or dyslexia, or a task force. We are one of 2 states. 37 states have guidebooks or manuals that are published. 14 plus states have task forces, and 36 states have dyslexia laws already on the books. Previously, when I emailed your committee, I did email a very in-depth chart that listed and linked every law for every state, a link for every manual that's out there, and a link for the task forces that have been set up and how they've been used. What I see in your bill is a great idea and intent to bring the collaborative voices to the table and the expertise. What I think I would encourage and I'm concerned about is that is a very small group of voices. And I think more people need to be at the table. I last night spent some time looking at 10 of the task forces in other states. And so I reviewed the charges that they had and I reviewed their membership. When I look at the collaboration happening here in Vermont, and the voices that have been and continue to be in the conversation, it's clear to me that it's not that we don't have the right experts, because we do have some amazing experts, even just on the Zoom call. I'm amazed and in awe at some of the testimony given on the literacy bills. I think that the reason that Vermont struggles is we aren't engaging with the people who are living these experiences and who are firsthand teaching these experiences. It's great to have associations and representatives of the system and the administrators that facilitate and are responsible. But my concern is continuing to limit the voices in the conversation will only be a detriment to our students in Vermont. Both of my boys have been impacted by this literacy crisis. And I think when we are able to bring school psychologists who evaluate and assess for learning disabilities and have the knowledge of what screening might look like or what that follow-up might look like, when we talk to teachers who are currently teaching in the classroom, people who are currently providing the teacher prep courses, it's not about eliminating any of the experts. It's about balancing the conversation in a way that allows the incredible knowledge and expertise at the table to deal with the challenges that might be impacting the outcome or the benefit that could happen from some of these conversations. Other states include parents. 9 of the 10 task forces that I looked at all included at least one parent representative or somebody with lived experience. Almost all of them also included speech and language pathologists, an elementary grade teacher, a middle grade teacher, a special educator, a speech and language pathologist, and pediatricians. Often in Vermont, we talk about local control, we talk about the need to move things along, but we don't get very far in terms of making progress on a systematic change. Too many children in our state are being identified as having an emotional disturbance because their learning disabilities are not identified. This leads to such a stigma and shame that I would argue being identified as having a learning disability or dyslexic or one of these other disabilities would be less stigmatizing and less detrimental to children. An example would be my son, who was in 7th grade at the time. I pushed for an independent evaluation from the Stern Center, and it showed devastating scores that contradicted the school report that he was on grade level and making progress in all of his IEP goals. At that point, we began to figure out where the breakdown had happened. But what really stood out for me for that was my son looked at me one day and he said, "You know what? I'm not stupid. I just learn differently because I have dyslexia." And so one of the conversations I've heard in this committee, and I spoke to Senator Campion about last night, was over-identifying students. And how do we kind of balance that? And as these groups are talking about a literacy vision and literacy plans, I just wanted to make sure that I did put that out there. I would advocate that the risk of over-identifying students it does not outweigh the risk of unidentifying students who will never grow into being a successful reader, who won't graduate with an ability to navigate and independently read, who won't be able to vote and participate in the very important democratic processes that happen related to our future. I just encourage this committee to really consider what other voices besides the traditional status quo experts can we look at and leverage, because there is a lot of knowledge in this state around literacy and dyslexia. And for far too long, it has been controversial and almost a war of reading. We as parents and advocates really want to be a part of the solution. Multiple parents became members of the state advisory panel this past year, and there's a prime example of what collaboration between educators and parents can look like and the benefits it can bring. And I would just implore this committee to think outside of the box, to think of the kids like my two sons, Peyton and Noah, who are struggling, who have been let down by our system, and not because we have bad people in place. There are so many amazing people and amazing educators that need more support and resources, and the parent voice also needs to be heard. I know I had 15 minutes. I'm a little bit short, so I have about 3 minutes to go, but I feel like I don't want to take up any of your more time. I would be happy to answer questions. I look forward to continuing to discuss this, and I just really urge this committee to take a moment and to think about the importance of the bills that are being passed, and not making sure that they're stamped and done and we can pat ourselves in the back because we're doing something, but that they're actually impacting the children who are living this, the families who are struggling it, and the teachers who want to teach these children. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Katie. And I know that we'll be discussing this further, and we'll certainly be in touch so that we can get your perspective on it. Thank you. And are there any questions? Senator Perchlik.
Thank you, Senator Hooker. And thank you, Ms. Ballard, for coming in. I agree with you, and it's a good point that we don't have any parents or student voices mentioned. I kind of look at the teachers' voices being represented by those organizations. So if they're not, I don't see them so much as experts but as the representatives of the different teachers groups. But that said, it's a point well taken that we got to make sure that those that are in the classroom that be heard. But I see the School Board Association and the Superintendents Association as associations of teachers, so they should, and the Principals Associations being the teachers. But still, it's a good point well taken.
Okay. All right, Senator Lyons.
Thank you, and thank you for being here, Katie. My question is, do you have some of your could you provide us with your testimony in writing, at least some of it? I know it's a lot to ask when you're probably in the middle of everything else, but it would be great to have that as a record of what you have presented to us.
Yes.
I would be happy to provide it. I'll be honest, I hand wrote it because I didn't have a ton of time. And I also have a
Don't
little
don't
chart,
send
but I
it. We
didn't
won't
have
be
it
able
by
to read
noon, so I didn't
it.
want to send it, but I'd be happy to send that along.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. Okay. All right. We have some stuff to think about with that, with regards to S75. Secretary French, you're up. I understand you have a time constraint, so we'll let you go and speak about literacy and
Yeah,
the
no,
supervisory union responsibility for oversight.
yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity. I do enjoy hearing Katie's passionate advocacy for this topic. I've learned a lot from her in the last year or so. Dan French, Secretary of Education, and thank you for the opportunity to testify. And again, thank you for the effort you've put into this topic, because I think it is an important one. I don't have any written testimony on this. I did submit some previous written testimony on literacy, but I was going to comment on a draft requisition. I think the title 210807, which was dated the 18th. I don't know if that's the most current version, but that's the one I was seemed to locate.
Okay. Yeah, I think it is. That the one, Jim? Is Jim here?
Draft 4.1, I think, is.
Yeah,
Okay.
is that the most current one, or?
Yeah, sorry. It's draft 4.1. It's the most current one. Yes.
Okay. So since I have submitted written testimony, and again, I've been very keenly interested in this issue. As secretary, it is something, as I mentioned, literacy we identified as part of our work with Act 173. So I was pleased to see that in your findings, and I think the findings section in particular really, represents a real solid understanding of the issues that we're need to engage in. Just some specific feedback. It wasn't clear to me what the source of the federal funds is in Section 3, $3 million appropriated from. And in brackets, it says federal funds. I'm not sure what that is, but maybe you don't know it yet either. But I certainly support the idea of statewide professional development sponsored by the agency in literacy. In Section 4, the literacy division, it's not quite clear to me what you mean by that. A division in the agency is 20 to 30 people. I don't believe that's your intention, to create an entire division in the agency of that scale.
I think what we were talking about as far as a division was to check with you to see how many people deal with literacy within the agency, and would you need more people? And with regard to the funding, I believe, and my colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong, this is money that is going to be put out soon. Are we looking? I'm looking at Senator Lyons to know whether or not this is the money that would be on the fast track bill. So it would be federal funds that are still available.
Okay. I think, either way, I do support the idea of statewide. I just had a question on what it was. In terms of positions, I think, I've testified, I think, a bit in your committee about this idea of what expertise do we need in-house, and to what extent do we contract out for expertise. I do believe the agency should have an expert on literacy in-house. It is, in spite of the coordination activities and the ability to contract out and so forth, I think it is such a critical topic relative to the education process that deservedly there should be a position dedicated to that in the agency. We don't currently have that position. I think I certainly wouldn't agree on a division, but I think there is a need. My solution, however, is to work with positions I have, and I just wanted to call your attention on this topic to some of the miscellaneous ed bill ideas that we had put on the table, and they are directly related, essentially, to creating additional capacity in the agency that would give us the ability to reassign positions to other areas. In particular, and I think a couple of folks had observed these are probably more complex topics. Maybe the miscellaneous ed topics were considered to be more technical corrections, but they are topics I think that are fairly straightforward, actually. One being the home study recommendation. And I think in spite of the controversy around that issue, you'd find that our proposal would be well received by home study advocates. It's essentially a simplification of the regulation. We did some work as relative to our COVID response, actually, because we've seen over 100% increase in home study, put a lot of pressure on our system, and we had to allocate staff from other areas of the agency to address the backlog of home study applications. But what we found through that process, particularly as we then looked at other New England states' policy towards home study, is that one of the reasons we had a backlog, other than the demand, was that our regulatory process is very complex relative to any of the other states. So what we propose is we're characterizing as a simplification. But what that would allow us to do is to have additional flexibility to assign positions that are currently dedicated to administering a fairly cumbersome regulatory process that could be used in other areas of the agency, such as literacy. The other one in the miscellaneous bill, I think, speaks sort of indirectly to this idea of capacity is the statewide school calendar. And believe me, but prior to COVID, I'd be the last person to bring forward a concept of statewide school calendar. Previously, I had uncomfortable experience being one of the two superintendents on a statewide school calendar committee the legislature set up maybe 10 years ago. And it was not a pleasant experience. We went around the state trying to divine the preferred school calendar among Vermonters, and we were unsuccessful in doing so. However, I think COVID in particular has really raised that interest in me again. And I think particularly in areas where we think about the professional development and the need to share expertise with something like literacy, we benefit by having a common school calendar that had vacations in sync, professional development days in sync, and so forth. As you know, right now in February, we have half of our schools on vacation and the other half not. And even today, we're working on some COVID-related communications that got caught up in this dynamic about half the districts not being able to respond, and we needed a pretty urgent response from them. So, again, I think the time is ripe for us to consider that. So I just point to those two issues. I think the agency should have a dedicated position. I think if we had some capacity freed up by looking at home study in particular, we'd be able to reallocate some positions.
Thank you. All right.
In terms of other aspects of the bill, I think the last thing I was really going to focus on is the idea of the literacy vision, which is in section 5. My observation is we already have a literacy vision, and that's section 2903 of chapter or title 16, which talks of what we have a clear policy statement on literacy outcomes, the foundational literacy, reading, instruction, and so forth. So we have a fairly well described vision in statute. And I think that statutory language was amended in 2009. So originally established in 1997, revisited in 2009, and it's really good. I think, the issue is implementation and expertise. And I would suggest in this section, instead of the vision, I would really like what Katie brought forward as sort of a council, if you will, and definitely to include parents in that council would be a better approach, not necessarily focused on vision, but to basically function as an advisory group to the secretary on issues related to literacy, and to be a sounding board for issues of literacy advocacy. I think that is the one piece, as Katie observed, nationally, we're one of the few states that doesn't have such an entity, and we would benefit from doing that. But I don't think that work is so much about establishing a vision. I think we have a really solid policy vision already established in law, but we would benefit from having a sounding board, if you will, to advocate for the issues. And it should include parents, particularly those parents who've had direct experience with the issue with their children.
Okay.
The piece on data collection is I think a good piece. The piece that we're keenly interested in here too is to assess literacy outcomes at grades pre-K through 3. That was my point previously in my testimony about the data. It is a gap at the state level. We don't have good state level data for outcomes in this area. And something I think that's been brought forward in the House bill to do that. So that'd be something I think to focus on. But other than that, I think it's a pretty comprehensive bill. And once again, I think, I appreciate your effort in calling attention to the issue. And to echo Katie's comments, I think we have adequate expertise to a certain extent. I think literacy needs to be made a priority. And we have a lot going on in education. Certainly we're always busy, but to me, it's the counter argument to that is there's nothing more foundational than literacy. And I think we've lost a bit of focus on that. You'll hear a continual theme in a lot of my testimony where it's, from my perspective, most of my career as a principal and superintendent, my observation would be our weakness from an organizational standpoint is not necessarily in the expertise of teachers. Certainly the agency could use additional focus in the area, but the issue is in the middle. And that's where we don't necessarily as a school system have well-articulated curriculum. The coordination of curriculum among school districts varies greatly. And where I've made some progress in the area of literacy as a superintendent is when I was starting to get my schools to work together better on these issues and staff to really come together around outcomes and looking at their data and so forth. So I think that's sort of the piece where we're probably weaker. And that's why I think elevating this to a more prominent concern, certainly convening state level professional development, but also assisting districts with coordinating their curriculum among their schools and ensuring that they have some focused effort put on literacy. In most multi-district supervisory unions in the state, I think you'd find that it would not be a common circumstance where the same literacy program is used from school to school in elementary schools, perhaps even in the same building. And we need to spend some effort on that as a state. So anyway, that's pretty much all I had to say. I really appreciate your work on this. Thank you.
I apologize for being late, Senator Hooker, and I don't want to interrupt your flow, but I'll just add that having come from appropriations for the past 45 minutes, they too, I guess they spent yesterday taking testimony on literacy. They too join our commitment to advancing this situation that we find ourselves in. So I'll listen to your testimony, Senator French. Senator Hooker, are you ready to hand over the reins, or would you like to continue?
I would just ask if anybody has questions of Secretary French, and
Okay.
then you can, Senator Perchlik.
Thank you. Secretary French, can you just give me that subsection of Title 16 where the literacy vision was?
2903. It's entitled Preventing Early School Failure, Reading Instruction. It states out a policy on literacy, a foundation of literacy, reading instruction, and a requirement that the state board and the agency and human services monitor this and develop basically a statewide plan.
So Senator Campion, just to bring you up to speed with that, Secretary French was talking about the portion of the bill that talks about the vision for literacy, and he was commenting that we have a vision in statute, and we might want to take a look at that.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Other questions for Secretary French? Secretary French, did you happen to weigh in, and I hate to just bring this up and waste people's time, but just having come from approach, on what you believe your agency may or may not need as it relates to continuing this? And if you've already, maybe just 30,000 foot explanation.
Yes, I made the statement. We do need additional position on this. I would say oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Your language on division is probably off the mark a bit. Division would be 20 to 30 people. I was just calling attention to the miscellaneous ed bills that we put on the table. They on the surface look like more complex issues than technical corrections, but one in particular, home study, which I think my point was you'll find, I think, pretty strong support from the home study community about that. It's really a simplification to more or less bring us into alignment with what other northern New England states do. That would free up capacity. I would have additional capacity to assign to issues like literacy. Another area interrelated in the same area of the agency would be food service and our student nutrition. So, I think it's important to look at those miscellaneous ed provisions as a way of freeing up some capacity for us. The other one I mentioned was school calendar. That was more about coordinating professional development across the state.
Great. In the interest of time, if it works for you, what I think we we're not, I think, averse in any way to taking up those bills. Prior to crossover, it might be hard, but we are sending a miscellaneous ed bill that's going to go to the House. It's going to come back to us. For now, though, we'd like to give some direction to the Agency of Education around staffing, that sort of thing. So just something for you to think about. I think, if you look at, for example, if we could Section 4, edit on the fly a little bit, the sum of X is appropriated from the general fund for fiscal year 2022 to the Agency of Ed to create a new literacy division.
I would recommend a statewide literacy coordinator, one position.
Okay.
And that, I sort of make the point between what internal expertise and we need versus what we can contract out. I'd say even considering today where we do contract out a lot of expertise, we still need to have someone internally that could manage that. And that's not something we necessarily have right now. I think it would be very useful.
Right. No, I appreciate that very much. And our committee also has been talking about sustainability, sustaining whatever we do. And I know Senator Starr was just asking, after we make this big investment in training teachers, how do we keep all of this going? And I think, I don't want to speak for all my colleagues down the hall, but one of the ways is making certain that something at the agency is there, somebody, some workload can be directed in a certain way. And I think that makes people feel pretty comfortable.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the current statutory language, 2903, it speaks to a requirement that there be a statewide plan and that the plan be updated every 5 years. One of the reasons that work has been neglected, other than there's been a lot of other things going on, there needs to be someone who holds that work with expertise on literacy and a focus. But I would make that argument because this is foundational to the educational process. It deserves that kind of focus. This isn't just a one-off sort of program. Yeah. It should be a core function of the agency to focus in on that. And I think clearly part of the reason we have some of the results we do is we've lost that focus.
Senator Perchlik?
Yeah, thanks. Secretary French, thinking about the advisory committee or whatever we're calling it that both Katie and you had mentioned, is that when you look at the other advisory boards, I'm assuming you have several, I think of the special education, which I think you mentioned, is if you were to point us in a direction of create a literacy advisory board like X, would you point to that special education, or are there others you'd point to for us?
I'd probably point at some of the other national models because here too, I think literacy is transcendent necessarily the agency of education. And there should be representatives on that, not only parents, but also from Agency of Human Service, which is alluded to in the statute. But we also, we need to have a focus on early literacy, certainly. So that points to the pre-K connection and childcare connection. But there's also a lot of work on, I think we discussed earlier, literacy on the other end, sort of leading, I won't say towards adult literacy, but in the upper elementary into the high school, because one of the things we find now largely through technology is the entry level literacy requirements for different professions have increased significantly due to the technical nature of a lot of careers today. So we have to raise sort of the standard across the board. So there needs to be I could see a connection there to adult literacy, to CTE centers, to upper elementary and content specialties as well. So it's a topic that sort of spreads out across. Once again, I think it's foundational to so much of what we do, and it deserves to have sort of a focus that cuts across some of the typical educational boundaries. But we could certainly provide you some language. I know Katie's drafted some with her advocate groups. That we'd be happy to do that.
That'd be good.
That'd be great. It is going to be, it looks like, Literacy Week, and after appropriations, it sounds like it might be after school week and a few other things weeks. So we've got tomorrow and today, tomorrow, and Friday to move some things. Any other questions for Secretary French? Secretary French, any final comments?
No, I'm tempted to just talk to you about COVID for a minute, but
Actually, if given that you're here, for you to take some time and talk to us about COVID, that would be appreciated. I'll also say before I forget, when you are pulled into approach to look at some of our recommends, where I wasn't sure of certain dollar amounts, I said, ask Secretary French. So you and I can have a conversation to make sure we're all on the same page at some point. But please, you have the floor to talk about COVID.
I was just going to mention something we've been working on in the last 48 hours or so. Is we are starting initial planning for vaccinating school staff, including teachers. So literally within the hour, just released a survey to solicit their to what extent they're interested in being vaccinated. So it sounds like a basic question, but the logistics involved in a lot of these processes are pretty complex and also very urgent. So I just want to let you know that survey's out. It's also going out to childcare providers statewide. And we're seeking to get a return on that for Monday, so we can start to prepare. We expect, in particular, not to draw a nexus between the two things, but the Johnson & Johnson data for that vaccine should be released shortly if it's not out right now. So we're starting to sort of bring some things together, and it came together fairly urgently in the last 48 hours or so. So just wanted to alert you to that. Thank you very much for that. Any questions along those lines for Secretary French?
That's great to hear, Secretary French, and that can be publicly disclosed. So my wife's a teacher; I can tell her that.
Yeah, my wife's a teacher too. I haven't told her. She's always the last one to find out. I'll wait. Sometime tonight, oh, by the way, did you see that email? But yeah, it's out in the wild, so to speak. It went live. We're reaching out to different stakeholder groups. So it is a tight turnaround, and we fully acknowledge that half our districts are on vacation this week. Again, school calendar issue, but. So we are asking everyone to respond back by Monday. It's not about signing up for the vaccine. So if people fail to fill out the survey, no harm, no foul. But we are trying to just get a general sampling of the interest because it'll help with our logistical planning at AHS.
Great.
And the FDA has approved the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, according to the Washington Post.
Okay. We knew it was imminent, so we were starting to do the planning.
Secretary French, also while you're here, would you mind saying a word? Your agencies put out a press release yesterday regarding testing.
Oh, yes.
If you wouldn't mind saying a word or two about that.
Right.
Everyone saw that.
So, we're expecting guidance from the U.S. Department of Education on a waiver, quote unquote, for the mandatory assessments. And ours is called SBAC, Smarter Balanced Assessment. And there were a number of states that were moving forward, sort of unilaterally pursuing generic waivers. Most of us were waiting for the U.S. Department of Ed to describe what the waiver construct was going to be for us. Last spring, they issued a generic waiver process for everyone. So we were expecting that. It did come out. It's not we don't have the ability to waive the test altogether. We are going to have some options to choose from. They are creating an expedited waiver process that more or less starts to look like a series of check boxes on a 2-page form. Do you want to waive this? Do you want to waive that? So we're in the process of waiting for that waiver template form to come out. But I can tell you give you a sense of what some of the options are. The big one, which we anticipated, was ability to waive using the test for accountability purposes. In many states, those accountability systems are fairly well described, and, for example, connect teacher evaluation to the use of those tests and things like that. We don't have anything like that in Vermont, but that's one of the obvious waiver flexibility provisions that we knew would probably be delivered, and it is. We have some options to further pursue relative to how we could deliver the test. This is it's a challenging issue state by state because it varies based on the specific testing technology that you use. Not everyone uses SBAC. Some tests lend themselves better to remote administration, for example, than others. So we have to work with our vendor a bit to understand that, what our options are. We are also have the option to test over the summer. I'm not sure to what extent that would be popular or not, but and apparently we can extend some things into the fall if we needed to. But not testing is not an option. So we're in the process of working through that, and I'll speak more to it at the press conference on Friday. But so I guess it's good and bad news. We were hoping actually to have more flexibility up to the point of canceling the test. Our primary concern was the amount of time it would have taken away from instruction at this really critical phase. We think we want to really maximize, and particularly in Vermont with our positive conditions, we were looking forward to maximizing in-person instruction after April vacation. It was really hard to justify taking 12 days out of the calendar for testing, let alone how many days it would take to prepare for the testing. But we're not going to have that flexibility. On the other end, we've got some options to pursue, and we'll be reviewing those and providing some recommendations to the governor to review.
Okay. Any questions on that for Secretary French? Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Great having you with us.
Yeah, take care. Good to see you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify. Talk to you soon.
And Senator Campion, let me just clarify that the FDA has confirmed the efficacy and safety of the vaccine and will look to allowing it to be used we hope by this weekend.
By this weekend. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Committee, before we continue, just briefly on approps, I think safe to say everything was generally well received. They're looking, of course, at numbers. I was pleased, as I mentioned, their commitment and the testimony they heard or discussion they had yesterday around literacy. They are also in agreement this needs to be addressed. And we will have to put out, and I know Senator Perchlik's been working on this, and we'll hopefully continue to partner with me on this, some after school grant distribution guidelines, if you will, that approps will likely need to include in this next round of funding. And then, but everything else, yeah, we'll wait and see. But my final question was, should I leave happy and warm or depressed and sullen? And they felt happy and warm, so that's good. All right, so with that, Ms. Myers, thanks for being with us. Appreciate all of your effort thus far, and take it away.
Well, thank you for having me. I know you're on a time crunch, so I'm just going to point you to my written testimony and speak to some of the points, mostly the really tangible, specific to the bill points, but I still would love it if you went and read the written record. Just briefly, I wanted to state kind of my approach for this round of testimony. I put together a memo for our members, sent it out with basically all the components of both your bill and the House bill, soliciting feedback, heard from a number of superintendents. I will say a pleasing number of superintendents also have tremendous background in literacy instruction too. Their route to the superintendency was through literacy instruction or special education. So was great getting to talk to some of them on this specific issue. One anecdote I have that is kind of representative of the framework of this bill is a superintendent talked about some of the work that he's doing in his system. He said, we collected the data, analyzed it, and then had specific professional development for specific teachers in our system to be able to target what the data was showing. And I think that that is very indicative of the structures that you are aiming to put into this literacy bill and kind of the more comprehensive, like it's not just about data. It's not just about professional development. It's not just about systems. It's about all of these things together, and it's about time. So I really appreciate that overall sentiment in the bill. So let me just go to my notes. Sorry.
And Chelsea, if you don't mind, and I'm going to ask the same of Mr. Fan and Ms. Bonesteel, we have our copy here. If you would just use that as a guide as we make our way through and point us to areas that you would like us to consider today and tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. So just briefly, the section 1, The one thing I would point to in my testimony is that I think it's, again, important to reference considering underserved populations in this. How is literacy instruction specifically not serving our students of underserved populations in terms of this bill? And I have some suggested places for you to also include this, but I think it's a really important component that could be added fairly succinctly in this draft. In section 3, the grant funding. For the grant funding criteria and considerations, you should include data disaggregated by historically underserved populations with due consideration for student privacy laws. We cannot ignore how institutional racism and biases lead to worse literacy outcomes for BIPOC students. It's a conversation we are also taking up in the Act 1 group, which I'm sure some of you have heard of. And there's a nice interface between those two efforts that I would think it is wise to recognize. Exclusionary discipline should not be included in the grant criteria, in our opinion. Engagement would be a complex measurement to capture for this grant process. It might unnecessarily exclude schools doing positive work in the domain of exclusionary discipline that might also be struggling with literacy instruction. So,
okay, let's, if we might, could we pause there for a moment? So, we have another bill that we're working on that would, as I believe you've been in to talk to us about, that would move us away from exclusionary practices in the state. And I'm just trying to understand a little bit more why we would remove that.
I don't think it's a proxy for engagement in this in this circumstance. It was raised by one of the superintendents. If you measure engagement by exclusionary discipline, it could be that that system actually has maybe antiquated sentiments on exclusionary discipline and have more students being expelled or suspended, whereas a school that might be struggling with literacy but is doing really good work in progressive practices around exclusionary discipline, that would unnecessarily not disqualify but put them lower on the list of grant criteria. So it's a really hard data point to get to, this engagement piece. We did have a conversation statewide about a statewide climate survey, and it's kind of dropped off the face of priorities, I think, but that might be something in the future that could capture something like engagement, but exclusionary discipline I don't think is the right measure and could have unnecessary consequences.
Committee okay with pulling that? Okay. Senator Perschlick.
Yeah, because we talked about that one before, because I was a little confused about giving a school more points because they had more exclusionary discipline, but before it was to try to engage those students that aren't getting the instruction. So I understand that purpose, but I do agree with superintendents there. I think it might just be counterproductive as far as the grant scoring system.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, thank you. Please continue.
Also in this section, I just want to point out, like Secretary French, we are interested in and continue to follow where the federal funding or funding streams in general are coming from, but we'll keep an eye on that, and hopefully it will be continued in the conversation.
Great.
I'm going to defer to the Secretary on the literacy division. I have no disagreements, except for I am not sure, and I would welcome a discussion with Secretary French, how freeing up a homeschool person would add literacy capacity into the agency of education. Funding maybe, or like the overall budget, but I'm not sure how that increases the capacity in terms of literacy if the person that you're freeing up is a homeschool expert. I might be misinterpreting him, but I think that's an important follow-up if you are considering that recommendation from Secretary French.
Just to clarify, Ms. Myers, I wasn't there for that. Well, I guess I was there for part of that discussion. Did he say that he was looking to free up that person to do literacy work. Is that how you interpreted it?
It was a little unclear for
Okay.
me. He did reference though his
Yeah.
efforts to that homeschool kind of reallocation as a way to free up capacity in the agency. So there is a disconnect in my mind, but it could be that I just didn't grasp it.
No, I'm glad you're flagging it for us. It's a good point. I'm inclined to, sort of let that bill kind of travel as it is, that miscellaneous ed bill. But I'd still like the agency to have a statewide literacy director, somebody that can be a point person, somebody that can facilitate whatever process it might be that needs to happen. I mean, it would be really exciting if we had that person right now in this committee, talking to us about. So I think moving in that direction, no matter what would be, is really important. And it looks like you're in agreement with that piece of it. And that person needs to know about literacy.
Yeah, and I think that the structure, not necessarily being a division, but a director, like you said, allows for more competitive salaries. A literacy specialist in an LEA is not going to want to go to the state agency if the salary is not competitive. So just keeping in mind that.
Yeah.
I also think it's a nexus to if there is an advisory council, like that was presented by the first witness and by Secretary French, that it would be nice to have that nexus to the advisory council and to the field at the Agency of Education. And related to that council, if that is something you decide to pursue, I would just ask that there be some articulation of goals or like an objective or a charge that goes along with that.
Ms. Myers, do you mind if we just pause there for a moment, only because I wasn't there for that, and we're sort of in a way in edit mode, so I just welcome a committee conversation about the advisory council. Senator Hooker, did that seem as though something colleagues would be interested in? Is that something that we might have in this bill?
Well, I think that what Ms. Ballard was talking about was having someone on, certainly on a council, or she called it a task force, I believe, that would be able to inform, the agency as to what the people on the ground, so to speak, were needing. So I'm not sure where it would come, but then when the secretary indicated that he'd be interested in having some kind of a council as well for literacy to inform the agency, or to sort of oversee the literacy aspect, that it seems as if it would certainly help with what our first witness was saying. So I'm not sure where to put that, though. I don't know whether that's going to be in this bill.
Okay. No, that's good. That's good to know right now. Senator Perchlik, please.
Yeah, I think we should add it in here, part of this section on, well, we said a division, but like we say, a statewide literacy director and the creation of an advisory panel for AOE to deal with these issues ongoing. And the secretary said he'd send us some language, and I think I understood that from Ms. Ballard too, that she had looked at all the other states at what they had done and had, from her perspective, what she thought would be the best way to go forward. We just got to let them know that we need it.
I think she may have already emailed something to me, and I'll also look for something from Secretary French, and I'll just mark it to loop to Jim on to make sure that he knows that, again, director of a statewide literacy programs and the creation of an advisory panel that would inform the Agency of Education. And it sounds like this advisory panel would be made up of, again, individuals on the ground, teachers, superintendents, principals,
Parents.
Okay, great.
I'm back. So, yeah.
Good to see you, Jim.
Yeah.
Terrific. Ms. Myers, please continue.
Yeah. Secretary French mentioned that there already is a vision. If you decide to go within that direction, I would just ask that you continue to reference an articulation of tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, the MTSS structure when it comes to literacy. I think it's again, that good nexus between Act 173, EQS, Vermont MTSS, and these literacy efforts. So I would just ask that that would remain in there. If you do,
1 second. Jim, could I ask you to mute only because I'm getting your paper shuffling and things like that. Thank you. Chelsea, you really, I thought, pushed for this literacy vision, right? I mean, I felt like it was, and maybe what we do, just something to think about, is would it be better to say, instead of developing, but maybe review the statewide vision? Because that keeps it there. And it also, to review the statewide vision for literacy. I mean, I don't know when this was done, the one that's Secretary French mentioned, but if we were to direct people to review it and then also make certain that, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 literacy instruction are all, articulated in that might be a good way to do it. It seems to me that even if the vision was created within 5 years, reviewing it at this point right now in this moment seems to make sense, and it's not going to, be that big of a deal. Ms.
Yeah.
Myers, Senator Hooker?
I think Secretary French said that it was revised in 2009.
It's
So
overdue.
I think it's due.
I mean, I was in my 30s then, and I can barely walk now in my early 50s. So yeah, that sounds like it's time. So I look to Ms. Chelsea, Ms. Bonesteel, both of whom advocated for this. Does that make sense to review?
yeah,
Indicative that us in the field, those of us in the field who testified in front of you didn't know it existed, says a
Right,
lot.
nor did I.
Says a lot about what
Right.
the
Yeah.
vision of the AOE and how that's been promoted over the years.
Okay,
all right.
great. Thank you.
Also in that section 5, we recommend considering instead of core principles for early literacy instructional practices, age appropriate proficiencies, in order to align with some of the language that we already use in the field around proficiencies. And then please include a representative from the Vermont Curriculum Leaders Association. They're critical in these efforts, and I put the name of the person that you could contact for that. Should we move on to section 6, or should I pause?
I think that would be great. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Perchlik.
Include them on what?
The vision task force or any task force that's resulting in this bill.
So in this case, we're talking about the group that would review the literacy vision.
Right. Yep.
Senator Perchlik?
Well, I'm just trying to find that in the bill. Like, is that in section 5? Or am I just missing it? Are you saying that was kind of our discussion? Are you suggesting we put it in there?
I think you referenced like VSA, VSBA, VPA, VCSEA, and we see that VICLA is missing from that conversation.
Where it says in collaboration. So it doesn't really mention a task force. It says talk to these different people. You want to make sure that we also talk to that person.
And probably looking around the room, Vermont NEA as well.
And maybe this is the kind of thing that a literacy advisory panel would do, right? Like all these people plus others would be on a panel, and then that's where AOE would collaborate with them.
I would think so. Yeah, a representative from each of those would indeed collaborate with the Agency of Education. I mean, we could create the task force, and this could be their first assignment. That's another way to look at it. We could, again, create an advisory panel, including the membership that we just talked about, and ask that once that panel is up, that advisory panel is up and running, ask them to review the statewide vision for literacy. It might be a little smoother that way than two different groups One just to review it, and the other, starting this process. Both we'd want to have involved. So why don't we move in that direction?
That makes sense to me.
Okay. Ms. Myers,
Should I move to section 6?
please.
In numerous conversations with superintendents, references have been made to local assessment plans. So if there could be language that refers to the local assessment plan as part of that comprehensive look at data, that would be great. Any data plan should include a focus on how students from historically underserved populations are disproportionately not provided the tools needed to be able to access literacy instruction. We recommend that you include explicit language to this in the data section of the bill. And then again, please include a representative from the Vermont Curriculum Leaders Association and any of the references to the other associations like VSA, VSBA, and Vermont NEA.
Great. So can you say something about a little more about assessment? I'm not sure I quite follow what some of your members are concerned about or what they're advocating for in this case.
Yeah, so some of the points talk about data used for professional development and analyzing. I would just ask also that another bullet point is how the data plan or planning interacts with the local assessment plan, because likely those benchmark assessments that we've spent a lot of time talking about, or any screeners, will be included in the local assessment plans. And just to have a separate initiative seems additive rather than integrative, and just to include that.
Thank you. Senator Perschlick.
Yeah, my overall question, Chelsea, and maybe you said this, I missed it, is do you feel this direction that we're kind of talking about anywhere in the bill now where it talks about in collaboration and the names the different groups, we said in collaboration with the literacy task force or literacy advisory panel, whatever we're going to call it, is the right way to go? Or do you think that do you support, one, I guess, the creation of this advisory panel or task force? And then two, if so, are you okay with us changing wherever it said in collaboration with groups, saying in collaboration with this panel / task force? Is that a clear question?
Yeah, with a disclaimer that I am not the only authoritative voice at the VSA. Just speaking candidly, I don't see an issue with changing to that mechanism. It might provide some formalized structure, which could be needed. The only concern is in my limited tenure here, sometimes groups get too unwieldy in size, and just keeping an eye on that, but also recognizing that we do want very distributed representation. Yeah. There should be a parent on that council to provide that voice. There should be a student on that council if possible. But when the groups get really, really large, I feel like stuff doesn't necessarily get done. But I don't want to stifle voices either. So there's the balance.
We have a library study that has, at this point, about 32,000 people on it. So see if we can compete with that. So just for clarification and for Mr. Desmarais, so again, we would create this advisory panel. We talked a little bit about membership, but we can still pull membership apart tomorrow. And their first line of attack or first assignment would be the literary vision. And then also they would work with the Agency of Education around data collection and covering the points that you mentioned. I mean, I like this a lot because it gets this advisory panel up and going. It streamlines, the process rather than having all these different groups do it. Sort of separately. Great. Senator Perschlick.
I just wondered, Mr. Chair, if we're kind of going through in an edit mode.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would hate to go through it all and then have Mr. Fannin come back and say, well, I disagree with all that or something like that.
I have already spoken with Mr. Fannin. I'm not saying, what is it that lawyers do? Jim, they prep witnesses?
But it goes for
Yeah.
the NEA or for Ms. Bonesteel, anybody. So I just wondered if you want them to weigh in if they opposed anything.
Yeah, no, I think that, your point's an excellent one. Thank you. As we're going through at this point, please weigh in, and let's do it at this point where Ms. Bonesteel and Mr. Fannin, we're talking about creating again this advisory panel. This advisory panel would work with the agency on these things that we're talking about, the vision, the data collection. You've heard some other points by Ms. Myers around the data collection. And also in relation to this advisory panel, we've also talked with Secretary French and now Ms. Myers about the creation of the director of a statewide literacy, or director of statewide literacy program, something like that. Ms. Bonesteel.
As far as the panel, I like the data collection. I like looking at the vision. I think I testified to this committee before. A vision that is just words is hard. So if that task force could look at models who represent the vision, would be awesome, because then schools can sometimes look at that rather than the weed that can get hit obviously in AE documents. And then the last thing was, what are you going to do about the data? So once you have the data, you can admire it all you want to, but would the task force be looking at the data to provide statewide opportunities as well?
Can I quickly just piggyback on that?
Yeah.
I think some of the language you already have around data is really solid in that direction. Like, it's not data for the sake of collecting data. It's data for informing professional development, including the reports from the Agency of Education, that sort of thing. So I think I wouldn't lose that wording if you did change directions.
Yep. So keep that consistent all the way through how we would use the data that's being collected. Mr. Fannin, anything up at this point?
As to the advisory panel or task force?
Yeah, the advisory panel, the task force, and the director of literacy for, within the agency.
So for the record, Jeff Fannin, Vermont NEA. Thank you for allowing me a few minutes.
I'm sorry, I have to ask, Jim, do you mind muting only because you've got your paper shuffling is echoing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. So I have some written testimony which I've submitted to Jeannie and have a couple of thoughts in there. I do think that the task force is a good idea. The advisory panel is a good idea. I think the best idea, though, is actually appropriating enough money, frankly, so that the agency has the resources to do this work. I have served on the Act 173 Advisory Council since its inception. I've served on the Bullying and Harassment Advisory Council since its inception back in 2012. So I'm showing my age here, I think, but the Act 173 Advisory Group is, I'm just going to put it out there, it has been a challenge. A necessary component of Act 173, a precursor to doing it, was professional development for the field. It was to change how people did their practice and how they performed teaching and reached more kids at a lower level and hopefully avoided identification for an IEP.
Yeah.
That has not happened. Just put it bluntly, it has not happened. It has happened sporadically in fits and starts around the state, but those schools that are doing that kind of work, they were already doing it. And it's the schools that aren't. And I remember Nicole Mace, Sue Siglowski's predecessor, talking about not making it a competitive process to get professional development monies from the agency, because those schools that have will get, and those that don't have it and really need it won't get it and won't, so it's an exacerbation of the problem. So that still goes on. And I think by putting the necessary resources into this law, into this bill, you are absolutely hitting the nail on the head, and it's got to be targeted and focused, and that person's got to work on this like a laser, or people, I don't know, division, Dan French said that was 10, 12 people, whatever the number was. I don't know I think he questioned you whether that's the number you think you were talking about when you talk division. He thinks of that as something in particular, a numerical amount of people. But whomever or how many people this is, they have got to focus on this like a laser to actually change the practice in the field and make it work. So we, as Libby Bonesteel just said, we can collect all the data we want, but what action do we take with it? And who's going to drive that action? And I think that's, I'm here to say thank you for that. The bill's a good bill. I do think that I thank you, Chelsea, for reminding folks here that the teachers need to be in on these conversations as well. Vermont and EA members are there and should be there. And they're the ones that are actually teaching these kids. And so they ought to be at the table having these discussions. They have a great deal to offer. And I think that we should hear from them and not from me. I'm not a teacher.
Hear, hear.
Yes, hear, hear. But I'm happy to, I've got more to say, but I'm happy to also just respond as you go through it. So
yeah, let's keep responding as we go through. We're going to have to stop at about 3:15 and sort of take what we have and move on and take a break and then move on to a new topic. But we still have plenty of time, I think, here to do some editing. Senator Hooker.
Well, with regard to what Mr. Fannin is saying about, putting the money in and, how many people do you need? The secretary said a division is about 30 people. And I'm wondering, one literacy
right
as opposed to 30 people. So there must be something in between there that we should look at as far as what would be sufficient for personnel to deal with this.
Yeah, and so everyone knows where I'm at with this. I talked to Steve Klein last night, and if we have language in here that says create a division and have a director, and we have this advisory group, for us to move it, it's appropriations is going to take a fiscal note on this. They're going to say, all right, what does it mean to have a division, et cetera, and people will continue to weigh in, and they'll appropriate a certain dollar amount. It doesn't make me feel great that it's definitely going to happen. If we can create this construct, get some budgeted number in there, get a director in there, start to have a conversation about what an actual division looks like, I'll feel pretty good that we'll have something that we can keep coming back to and referencing and improving, if you will. Okay. Senator Hooker.
No, that sounds fine. It's just I thought that there was a big space between 1 and 30 and
oh yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Not that we have to put a number on it. And
but you're absolutely right. This needs the attention, and again, just having come from a probes, they get it. I mean, they are deeply concerned about the state of literacy in this state at this moment. Okay.
Can I just add one thing? I agree, Senator Hooker. This is, there's a big difference between 1 and 30 or whatever. But we have got to, if we're genuinely concerned, and I know that we all are, and I am not questioning that. If we really want to address this, we need to give the AOE the necessary resources to really, truly support the field.
Yeah.
And I think it would be an enormous missed opportunity if we don't. And this is nothing for Vermont and EA in this. I just think we generally want to help kids, give the resources to where they need to go, and I'll stop at that. Thank you.
And if I may, I'm not sure if this is what you're advocating for or not, Mr. Fannin, but I mean, it would be tough for this committee to say, hey, we're going to create a division here. How many people do this? Let's take some testimony. Should we have 10 people, 15? It's just not going to happen in any, I think, thoughtful way, I worry. But your point's well taken, that they need to create a division. And I would think under the current leadership, Secretary French, take that seriously, and it's not going to come back and say, I hired a part-time person and 2.5s to support that person. That's my instinct. Senator Hooker.
And then going back to what you brought up when you first rejoined the meeting, how do we make this sustainable?
Yeah.
Where is this money going to come from in the future?
Yeah. And I can just say, that came up in approps, and hopefully we'll get some dollars directed out of the general fund to do this kind of work. Piece of cake. Ms. Myers, please.
Yeah, we're on the last
Yep.
section, I think. In that section, please consider including in this review licensing and relicensing criteria. Just doing pre-service, I don't think gets at the whole picture. I think there's a lot of interest to really examine the route to licensure and the route to becoming a reading specialist. And this might be a good vehicle to start examining those practices and thinking about our teacher pipeline. And then instead of using the phrase evidence-based structured literacy instruction, we ask you to consider the words evidence-based literacy instruction, so removing structured,
Yep.
and instead including the definition that is reading, writing, and spelling instruction that is supported by high-quality research that meets rigorous standards and is proven to translate effectively to classroom practices. And that language is right in my written testimony, but we would highly recommend the switch to that language.
And just to clarify, Chelsea, you've got, we take out the evidence-based literacy instruction, but say evidence-based literacy instruction dash reading, writing, spelling instruction, etc.
So currently it says evidence-based structured literacy instructions.
Got it.
It would be removing the structured word, and then instead of the definition that's provided in part B, I believe it is.
Yep.
Part B would be where that dash is. Sorry, I should have put B there. And then the definition that, or the recommended definition that we're providing. And that is consistent with, I think the terminology closely represents what is known in the field, that language.
Okay. Senator Persily.
Ms. Myers, are you suggesting the rest of that definition, we would need it, just your definition is sufficient? So like all that other part B, whatever that is, 10 lines, we wouldn't need any of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think if you're doing an analysis, right, you want to be not as prescriptive. You want to know what's actually out there. You don't want to automatically influence how this is going to be looked at with a very specific lens. And the point is not to get away from maybe considering that definition, but to zoom out further and not make the charge so specific.
And Jim, is that highlighted? Sorry, Chair, if it's okay.
No, please go ahead.
That's all highlighted in your 1.4 draft. Is that because we were already talking about taking it out, or did we add it in or something?
You had a different definition before, which was science-based.
Right.
We haven't reviewed the changes yet in this draft, so yeah.
Right. So we would go ahead and take the suggestion that Ms. Myers put forward, which is more consistent in, what would you say, in the definitions that we've used already statewide in different policy making. Ms. Brumsfield?
It's consistent with ESSA, which is the educational law that we have to follow.
Great.
I support that.
Please.
I was just going to say I support that, switching that to that.
Sounds good. Mr. Fannin, other comments as we could be getting closer?
Sure. So I'll start where you just ended, which is I support the VSA's Chelsea Myers' proposed language on section 7B. So just for the record, it's in my written testimony, but I'll say it aloud here as well. We were playing around with this, and it may be imperfect, but in section 6, one of the things I talked to a couple teachers last night, because everybody was talking last night about this. It was hot on the press. That one of the things teachers do or need to do is develop an individual profile for each struggling student. And then that way they create interventions that work for that particular student's particular problems. And I just thought it might be good to add something, a new section 5, Jim, in section 6, a subsection 5 in
Why don't you run it by the
section 6.
committee first, Mr. Fannin?
Sure. Well, I don't know where, I'm trying to catch up to you here.
Yeah.
So I thought in section 6 of the draft language, on page 5, you end with 4 currently.
Yeah.
And I would suggest adding 5.
Okay.
That says how educators develop an individualized profile for each struggling student. The notion and concept there is having this data collection, if you will, helping teachers, school leaders figure out how to develop a profile for each individual student that is struggling. It's not to say what it should be, but it's to allow, and so again, my language may be imperfect there, but the concept is teachers develop individualized profiles for students. And shouldn't this group then somehow create a process by which they do that, or help, have that discussion?
As they're working with teachers, as they're directing the agency, going out, making certain that students each recognizing that they, students all have unique experiences, without a doubt. Ms. Myers, Ms. Bonesteel, any thoughts on that? Just it's one, a number 5 in section 6.
I think if it were added to the task force, if you're making a task force, that would be the place to go. With that piece, what Mr. Fannin is referring to is a key component of remediation in Tier 3. That is missing from most Vermont schools. Absolutely. We're working on it in my district right now.
Okay.
And is essential. Here's a profile of a kid. Here are interventions that work for him. So it's pretty logical thinking, but we haven't developed that. We treat each kid as like this new mystery to solve, and oftentimes we don't need to. But it is getting, my worry would be that it's getting pretty specific about, it's getting pretty specific for legislation.
Well, that is my worry as well. I'm sorry to jump in here, Mr. Chair. I do worry about it, but my thought was, and we are changing as we go with the task force, and that's new. And so it may not be the right place, and perhaps Ms. Bonesteel's right, it should go in the task force group, but I don't know what that language looks like. So I'll
Maybe
defer on that.
Hold it for now. Ms. Myers?
Yeah, I would again emphasize the articulation of Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, which is a component of what Mr. Fannin just said.
Okay. So let's hold it for now, Jeff. And when you see a new draft, you can come back in and let us know what you think. Other points, Jeff?
Sure. Nothing specific as to the bill. I'll just leave it at that. And I'm sorry, section 7A. And this is found on page 5. I think it ought to say, also add to that the Standards Board for Professional Educators. The Standards Board is the entity that does work with teacher prep programs.
Yeah.
So it ought to be in conjunction with the AOE and the Standards Board that they
that's a great
assess these programs.
A great catch. Mr. Fannin, what does your agency in general, or what does the NEA in general think of moving in this direction with literacy and this kind, the bill that eventually will get out of here, hopefully within the next couple of days?
Look, I can't say it enough. I mean, this is significant stuff. It's great stuff. It's what, we support the effort to focus on literacy. And it's why we supported Act 173, frankly, in 2018. the DMG report talked a lot about literacy. We believe that that's a key component going forward, but we have to do it and do it well. And that's, I think Act 173 has struggled. And we, last year, just to be honest here and clear, we called for the repeal of 173 until the professional development took place, because that was a necessary precursor to enacting 173 or the implementing the plan of it. And it has not happened. And so we just got to a point where we're saying, let's repeal and until we do that necessary PD work. So if we're going to do it this way, we support it. I think it's a good way to go in this bill. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Ms. Bonesteel, final comments, questions? As we, again, folks, please know we're happy to share the next draft. We know that there are a lot of moving parts. A lot's been said. But I think it's been an important conversation, an important dialogue. We want to get this right.
My only comments would be that I think Chelsea and Mr. Fannin did a great job, in especially Jeff's comments about the agency being able to pull off professional development around 173. He's not exaggerating in any way, shape, or form there. And so we don't want to put that same piece again. I actually like the idea of a literacy director if that at the Agency of Education, if that person has the expertise.
Yeah.
And I share Chelsea's worry that it can't be the home study coordinator.
I absolutely. Yeah, we all agree with you there. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it has to be well paid. I mean, if it's
sure, absolutely
not well paid, you're not going to get an expert in the field. And I think if you have an expert as the liaison between the field and the Agency of Education, good things could potentially happen there. So yeah, right. I think we're moving in the right direction.
May I just ask so when you're all saying that 173, was it just, it didn't carry the financial support, the dollars that it needed? Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
I think that's a part of it.
Okay.
I'll just, the first meeting we had, we broke up into two subgroups, rulemaking and PD. I went with the PD group.
Yep.
A lot of people went the rulemaking group. After the second meeting, we were told we had to focus on rulemaking. So everybody left the PD room, if you will. This was back in the days of being in person. This is 2018. And we and then went to rulemaking. We went full bore on rulemaking for over a year, 18 months. And nothing at all was done on PD for the field. And so here we are. We've had, I think now that would be one meeting then. I think we've had one meeting since, and one was recently canceled. So we've had maybe 2 or 3 meetings on professional development. That was an absolute key component of Act 173. So nothing's happened for the field.
And 173, in order for that to be successful, what 173 is speaking, I know it's speaking directly to special education, but what it's really speaking to is a very strong multi-tiered system of support in a school. We don't have those in Vermont. And just because you have a pamphlet that details what the definitions are, doesn't make it so, right? And so we have this nice booklet that looks beautiful with a great graphic. Somebody paid a lot of money for the graphic with a lot of words inside of it. But we have very different definitions in each of our schools. And what we've designed is an ineffective special ed system that kids go in and they don't come out. And so the professional learning has to be around how do you develop strong, high quality professional or multi-tiered systems of supports, just what Chelsea was just referring to with what is tier 1, what is tier 2, what is tier 3. We have a vastly different if I walked into any school in Vermont, I'd get a different definition of those things.
Yeah.
So that never happened. And without a strong MTSS, you can do whatever you want to with SPED funding. You're going to get the same results.
Okay.
Thank you, Libby. I'm going to call you Libby. And by the way, it's Jeff, please. I could not agree more.
It's Mr. Fannin in this committee, buddy.
Oh.
No, you've all been great. And I realize, when we get to the end, these kinds of things, for those of us who've been here in this building a while, it gets tricky. It gets complicated. We want this to work. We want this to help kids. So I do appreciate everybody's patience and everybody's pitching in. today, tomorrow, Friday, we'll just keep working at it. Libby's looking at me like, are you kidding me? I'm not here tomorrow and Friday. Listen, Campion.
Oh, I'm a superintendent in the middle of a pandemic. I'm still working.
No, but and by that, I really mean just once we get a new draft, look forward to either working maybe through Chelsea, Libby, if you can, and Jeff will be in contact with you. But, what I'm excited about is in the evening, people are calling, parents are looking for something like this. Teachers are looking for something like this, and colleagues in the Senate are looking for something like this, which, and all of you. So thank you. Okay, with that, I think we'll take 15 minutes unless anyone has any final comments. Thank you all very much. Let's take 15 minutes. Jim, if you don't mind staying on, that would be great.
Here we go.
Great. So continuing on the conversation about whether or not how we structure a division or a director, we were talking about. Senator Hooker.
Well, I'm just, getting a little hung up. I think vision thing, as Senator Perchlik said, the secretary envisions divisions as a number of people. I think 20, 30, whatever. Maybe there's just it's a function of calling it something different to show that perhaps there's more than one position that will be needed. But it sounded as if Ms. Myers was talking about as long as there's someone in charge overseeing literacy that has a connection to the field, then that would be important.
Jim, did you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I was just going to mention you could create a director position, as we're talking about, and have the council make recommendations as to what staffing needs they think the agency needs to support that position.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I think Senator Hooker, Senator Perchlik may have even said that at one point. But yeah, I think that sounds like a great way to move, kind of put that in their assignments. We have them doing a number of different things, and for them to consider that seems to make sense to me. What do you all think? Okay, Senator Perchlik?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Because I think if we try to say a division, it just means different things for different parts.
Yeah.
There's a clear definition of what a division is. It's just how they might divide up their own.
You're in state government, Senator. Do you work within a division or no?
We do.
You do. Is it how many? Is it a large group of people?
4.
No, 4. Interesting. Okay.
So it's just it's just kind of divides it up by kind of like what kind of stuff they work on. So you could have a one-person division if you want.
Right.
I think it's a definition or a designation without any meaning precisely. So we want to say that they want to have staff towards this, whether they call it a division or something else, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And I think having the advisory group weigh in on that is fine, but we don't want them to wait to hire the person. We want them to hire the person right away and then work with the advisory group to find or see if there's additional people they need to hire.
Yeah, I agree. Jim, is that clear?
That is clear.
Great.
Senator Campion, since you're not online, can I weigh in for a second?
We are online, but you can also weigh in.
Oh, I didn't think you were back on YouTube. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just was going to say the other thing you could do is you could have a person who's not a division director, but still a director. The AOE has several of those positions. So it could be put underneath educator quality or one of their other divisions. Underneath that, you can have a person that's a director of literacy or whatever you chose to call it.
Yeah. Senator Perchlik?
If we wanted to raise the profile of the position, we could say a director that, is that speaks directly to the secretary or to a commissioner. So we just say this is a high level position. It's director of statewide literacy program that, answers to the secretary.
I like that a lot. Director of statewide literacy programs. Senator Lyons.
Why don't we just put it in the secretary's office? I mean, so what we've done with the with the prevention director of prevention and also a director of trauma informed services is put it into the secretary of AHS's office. And then beyond that, the other thing that, we could think about is defining the credentials that the individual must demonstrate or have, somehow define the expertise, whether it's a master's degree in literacy or whatever, or experience equivalent to.
Yeah, that's something we might talk a little bit more about tomorrow. I think it's a good point once we see a new draft, see if there might be something there where we kind of play with the language. And I do like the director piece reporting to the secretary. I think that really does elevate the position. I think you both bring up good points. Okay, anything else on this before we move on? I'll just tee this up a little bit. So we are, let me get my, hold on. We're looking at S32, an act relating to school wellness and feminine hygiene products. We have a slightly revised draft in front of us that I'd like Mr. Demaray to take us through. And then we will hear from witnesses. This is a bill that was put forward by Senator Lyons and others. We've already been taken through it once. My hope is, and we'll see if this works, is to create a miscellaneous education bill that would include this and the library study, as well as possibly multicultural liaisons, and ship that. That is what I've been in conversations with the Pro Tem's office about, and that would also, I think, work for us going forward, so that we would likely get something back that we could even add more to. So I'm not seeing any questions. Mr. Demaray, would you mind bringing us through S32 again with that, highlighting that the couple of changes that we heard from constituents on?
Sure. Jean, can I share the screen? Thank you. Okay. All right. Can people see this? Oh, too big.
Even better.
Yep. Okay.
Perfect.
So, for the record, Jim Demaray going through this council, going through draft 1.1 of your amendment to S32. There are very few changes here. I did a strike all because this might be moving, as the chair said, to the miscellaneous bill. So it'll all be here when we move it, or if you move it. We've been through this before, so I won't go through this language again. I will remind you, though, that the wellness program definition is being expanded broadly. Used to be just for fitness and nutrition. Now it's for comprehensive health education. So a much broader concept here, and that definition would be used to update the school wellness policy. So just to remind the community what's going on in these first two sections. The changes, though, came here. So now it says in
Sorry, Jim,
intends to ensure that all students
Jim, you're a little in and out for me. I don't know if that's true for everybody. Yep, looks like it's true for everybody. So if you could.
People hear me now?
Yep, much better.
Huh. Okay. So we've got this language change from female students to all students attending. I believe that's intended to pick up transgender students. And then in B, we have just really the addition of where the products have to be located. So still it's in a majority of gender neutral bathrooms, but now also in the school nurse's office. And those were the only changes.
And Jim, would you just take us through, again, just the high overview of what, so everyone knows what we are trying to do with the bill overall?
Yeah, there's two things really. One is to is running the wellness policy. So one is to update the wellness policy in a much broader way. So comprehensive health means, it's a big definition. I read it to you last time, but it includes like personal health, includes like information on especially transmitted diseases, environmental factors, and health. There's a very broad definition. So rather than focusing just on fitness and nutrition, they'll focus on a much broader definition, and that will therefore translate into, when they update that policy, it will include a much broader framework than before. Also changes here in terms of the advisory council shall include 3 members with expertise in health services, health education, or health policy. What's the change? They have to meet not less than twice a year. I understand that the wellness, the advisory group here has not been very active, so that's why this is language here. And then this is taken out here in terms of giving information about height and weight. I believe there are other means of doing that than this. And then here's where you update the wellness policy with a broader definition. And then here we go into the menstrual hygiene products. So those are the only 2 areas that are really covered in this bill.
Senator Lyons, any comments from you in particular right now as it relates to the bill?
No, I think the wellness section of the bill was something that this education committee worked on last year or last session. And as I'm looking at it and then thinking about where we are right now with kids, this is an open question. Is there anything that we should be saying about social and emotional or wellness in addition to what is there in the definition? And I kind of leave that open for people like Jay Nichols, who might have something to offer on that. Just thinking that, we usually think of sports and fitness and nutrition and the 4 food groups or whatever else, and that's really the wellness. But it could be other things. So it could be, I personally like the idea of yoga or something like that. But how to put in the concept of mental health or emotional wellness? Is it in there?
Emery?
Well, I was just going to remind the committee as to what the definition of comprehensive
That's it.
health education means. So it has 11 components to it.
Oh.
It begins with body structure and function, environmental health, pollution, public health, safety, including first aid, etc. Disease like HIV, infection, and sexually transmitted diseases, family health and mental health, including various instruction methods, personal health habits, including dental health, consumer health, including health careers, health costs, human growth and development, including physical, emotional, and social elements, drugs, including alcohol, caffeine, nicotine, nutrition, and sexual abuse.
Sounds pretty comprehensive. What
Right.
else can we put in there?
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
So,
Please, Senator Hooker.
for Jim, as long as nutrition is mentioned in comprehensive, do we need fitness and nutrition? Do you want to highlight fitness and nutrition in the bill itself? Or does comprehensive take care of that and negate the need for it?
It might, let me go back through and I'll go through that definition and see whether we have to mention that separately or not. Yeah.
Great. Any other questions, committee questions for Mr. Demarais or Senator Lyons before we hear from our witnesses? Okay, very good then. Sue Siglowski, thanks for joining us. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on S32. I am here today for the VSBA, but also for the VSA and the VPA. Jeff Francis was not able to join us, but I know that Jay Nichols is in the room from the VPA, so I'm sure he'll be able to also answer any questions that you have. We submitted written testimony as a collaborative effort, and that is on your website. I don't think I need to necessarily pull it up. I'll just summarize it here. The first area of the bill that we covered was updating the school wellness program definition and model policy. Section 1 of S32 adds comprehensive health education as defined in 16 VSA Section 131 to the definition of wellness program. It also specifies that the Advisory Council on Wellness and Comprehensive Health must include at least 3 members with expertise in health services, health education, or health policy, and meet not less than twice per year. Section 2 of the bill.
I'm sorry, Ms. Siglowski, are you taking us through the bill or are you giving us recommendations?
I just had summarized the bill, but I can just tell you what our recommendation is.
Yeah, I would say just what your recommendations are at this point.
Okay. Our associations support the changes in sections 1 and 2 that are meant to update the definition of wellness program and model wellness program policy. And would just note that currently Vermont's model wellness policy establishes goals for nutrition promotion and education, nutrition guidelines, and physical activity and other school-based activities that are designed to promote student wellness. And under this bill, the goals are expanded to include all of the items that Mr. Demarais just listed when he talked about the expansion. On the menstrual hygiene products section of the bill, which is section 3, our associations support the purpose of section 3, which is to ensure that female students attending a public school or an approved independent school have access to menstrual hygiene products at no cost and without the embarrassment of having to request them. We note that the bill requires school districts to bear the cost of supplying menstrual hygiene products, which does make it an unfunded mandate, and that this cost is unknown. Additionally, we assume that storage devices or dispensers would be required so that there's a way to store the products in a sanitary manner, and that could possibly add to the cost. It's also important to consider that the regular use of school facilities by community groups for meetings and events, which could possibly impact the level of supplies that schools will need to have on hand. And I would just conclude by saying that, or reminding the committee that unfunded mandates in this bill and other bills currently under consideration in the General Assembly are incremental increases, which may not seem significant in isolation when you're looking at just one bill, but when they can add up to significant impacts on local school district budgets and ultimately the education fund. And Jay and I are here to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Senator Lyons.
No, the question is, have you looked at sort of what the potential cost might be for some of this, or thought about possible charitable donations that might be available? I mean, I would think first about doing some kind of fiscal note on it, just to understand what the burden is, because I don't like unfunded mandates any more than you do. And it's kind of weighing the kids who would have access to these products versus the cost. But I mean, have you done any sort of analysis on that at all?
We have
No.
not done an analysis on that, but I think possibly last year JFO may have done something for the Senate Education Committee, because this was considered last year as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I testified on this last year, and there was a similar bill in the House that I testified on several times. Had the condoms piece in it and another other things. And I'm almost sure that JFO did something on that particular item.
Senator Perchik, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, we definitely got a fiscal note. I don't know if they took in all the considerations that was just mentioned, but we did get a fiscal note on the estimated cost.
Okay.
And Chair, we should also just share with you that many schools already do this.
Great.
We don't
that's
have a
good to know.
percentage, but there's a lot of them that already are in compliance with this
Yeah.
the
Great.
intention of the bill.
Great.
Do you have any sense of how many schools that is, or how many there are, or?
The vast majority of high schools already provide for this. Now, they may not have them in over 50% of the bathrooms. I don't know that, but I know that high schools give them out all the time for free. And I know a lot of middle schools do as well.
Huh, good, thanks.
Terrific. We do know that Senate Finance, I believe, passed out a bill this afternoon that would make them tax-free, which is a bit of savings.
I'll save some money.
Save some money. So, any other questions? Okay, thank you both. Appreciate you being here, and we'll get the fiscal note. Mr. Fannin.
Thank you and welcome. Thank you for having me back on S32. My comments are even shorter than Sue's, and which are we support S32, frankly, and in the meat of the bill at Section 3. This was an issue last year in the Senate Education Committee. My board took it up at a board meeting sometime in the spring, I believe, before COVID. Yeah, I know before COVID, because we were all together. And they 110% support this. This is already happening, right? As Jay noted, in many schools, but not in every school. And so that's the issue, right? It's where it's not happening that it needs to be happening. Otherwise, people are doing it already. My members, whether support staff or teachers, they're coming to school with these products themselves, and so they're paying for it out of their own pocket because it is needed. And also, what was discussed with my board was it's earlier and earlier when girls reach puberty in this regard. So it's got to, it's fifth grade. I heard even stories of younger, but I think that's a fair line to draw. And we support the bill as drafted. So,
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fannin, and thanks for spending so much time with us today. Any questions for Mr. Fannin? Ms. Casey.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being with us. I don't know if we've had you in yet this year, so if you don't mind just introducing yourself, your name, and the organization you're representing for the record.
Thanks. My name is Kara Casey, and I work for the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. Just for a little background, the Vermont Network is Vermont's federally recognized domestic and sexual violence coalition. We represent 15 independent nonprofit member organizations which provide advocacy and support services to victims of domestic and sexual violence. Together, these organizations provide 24-hour hotline access, emergency shelter, youth and children's advocacy, and prevention education in schools, serving every community in Vermont. And we are in full support of S32, and specifically the piece around the menstrual product access in schools. I reached out because we are a member of a new and growing coalition, the Menstrual Equity Coalition, in support of increasing access to menstrual products in Vermont. The Vermont Network's vision is a world where all people can thrive, and my specific focus is on economic justice. We believe access to menstrual products is an economic and a gender justice issue. A recent study showed that 1 in 5 teens struggle to afford and purchase menstrual supplies. This lack of access in schools creates a strain on a young person's education and has potential health implications. 1 in 4 teens have missed class due to lack of access, and 61% have worn a tampon or pad for more than 4 hours because they did not have enough access to period products. So that puts them at risk for infection and, such as toxic shock syndrome. And we know that over 99% of households experiencing domestic violence also experience financial abuse. And this can include withholding income to buy necessary household products or withholding the products themselves. And this can affect a young person's access to these products and contribute to what is called period poverty. So beyond the economics, there is a lot of stigma associated with menstruation. Providing menstrual products that are free and easily accessible in schools helps to prevent the embarrassment that many youth who menstruate experience when they're unexpectedly in need of a pad or a tampon. And by stocking these products in bathrooms that are gender neutral and ones that are designed for females, you would be helping to end that stigma and showing that they're just as much as a necessity as other products that are stocked in those bathrooms, such as toilet paper and hand soap. So in conclusion, we would urge you to support this bill, and youth rely on supportive and askable adults in their lives to help them navigate issues around healthy sexual development. And we feel like this bill is one way that schools can support their students to do that. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Casey. That was great testimony. Important to hear. Thank you. And Ms. Casey, have you submitted that?
I have not, but I can.
Would you be so kind as to do that so we have it for the record?
Sure.
Questions for Ms. Casey? Terrific. Okay, thank you so much for being with us. Please feel free to stay if you have the time, but also recognize that you might need to drop off. Mr. Secretary.
Good afternoon. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thanks for being with us again.
No, thanks. I apologize for being late.
No problem at all.
Dan French, Secretary of Education. The version, I'm looking at Senate Bill 32 online. I'm not sure if that's the most current version, but
draft 1.1.
Yes, that's what I have. Yep. And we and I personally, but we as an agency very strongly support this legislation. I think it's really important to situate this in the context of the broader wellness work, and it's perhaps similar to our perspective on literacy. It's something that just needs to be reinvigorated to a certain extent. So we appreciate the opportunity to think of this strategically. The section on the wellness policy, I just was just going to call out. Let's see if I can get to the section. Section 2. The history on the wellness policy was complex. The last time this became a major initiative, it was, if my memory serves me correctly, it was introduced as like 2 separate initiatives, one from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, essentially from a student nutrition perspective, and then there was also the sort of the educational wellness. So districts were left to a certain extent to reconcile 2 model policies from competing state governments. So I think there, if my memory serves me correctly, there is a requirement currently that all school districts have a wellness policy. In my experience, it's sort of one of those issues that, again, could be leveraged more broadly. So I think this legislation will reinvigorate an examination of how to use school board policy to address more broadly the issues of student wellness, to include the hygiene issue, the feminine hygiene product issue. So I think it's a good approach, and one that we strongly support.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Any questions for Secretary French? Secretary, thanks for being with us so much today. We really appreciate it.
Again, sorry for being late. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Mr. Moore from the Independent School Association. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Senator Campion, and thank you, committee, for inviting me in. I'm here to support my colleagues from the VSBA, the VSA, the VPA, and the Vermont NEA with a testimony. The section 3 of the bill is non-controversial amongst the independent schools community. We support it entirely. So I'm just pleased to add my voice to the folks from the public schools side.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moore. Questions for Mr. Moore? Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, Senator Hooker.
Mr. Moore, are your schools already doing this, engaging in this practice? Are they?
I am aware that some are, Senator, but I don't have numbers on how many are and are not.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Moore? All right, well, thank you for being with us. Appreciate it. Thank you all. So committee, looks like tomorrow we will return to a new draft of literacy. We'll also plan to include this bill with the bill on the libraries. And the bill, we might hear some testimony tomorrow afternoon. I'm still working with Senator Rahm on multicultural liaisons. Package that up together and work on that a little bit tomorrow and a little bit on Friday. Let's see. And we will also need to work to get something ready to go, possibly on Friday or soon when we get back on after school. As it looks like things might be moving along in that direction. So we might have to just get some language, some agreement around some language, how those funds would be directed. Any questions before I pass it back to Mr. Desmarais? Because I did, thanks to Jeannie, did ask him to come in and just review the changes that he made to from yesterday's discussion on S16, the school discipline bill. But before we do that, does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns, compliments? Yes, Senator Persley, please.
Honored to compliment Senator Lyons. She's done, yeah.
Wait, I'm sorry. Compliment her on what?
Yeah, just for being Senator Lyons. You know?
This is not fair. This
I
is
am
totally unfair.
working on a draft bill. I don't know what we're going to name for Senator Lyons in this state, but it's got to be something. And
yeah,
it's
right.
Bigger, it's bigger than a bridge. It's got to be something. I'm with you on that.
But now that I've done that, tomorrow we have the joint session, so we're still going to meet, but we're not going to vote on anything tomorrow, I'm assuming. But Friday you are expecting a vote.
I would hope that by Friday we would be able to vote on a couple of things.
Okay.
Does that work for you, Senator Perchlik?
I was just preparing as the clerk. I want to get, you know.
Oh, yeah. No, I just want to also make sure because, you know, sometimes people schedules, I know Senator Terenzini is doing this, some stuff right now, and I told him that I would keep things open for him. Senator Chittenden.
I was going to ask, I'm getting a lot of emails about H81, and I thought I recall you saying we might be taking that up this week. Is that on the docket for after town meeting break?
No, that's on the docket for Friday to take up, to have a bill introduction and to have Mr. Desmarais take us through that, so we can at least get started on that, so I can get where everybody else is at. This is something that the Senate voted on last year, and I'm hoping to do that as soon as we vote out a couple of things. So, yeah.
New guy question. So the likelihood of us voting on it on Friday is not likely, right?
On H81?
Yeah.
No, but upon our return, depending on what the committee wants to do, I would think soon thereafter. And that we would try to move something like that. It also has to have a stop in appropriations. So just need to make sure people have enough time. Senator Lyons.
I want to compliment the chair of the committee for his good work. I'm lashing back and out.
Find something to name for him.
Yeah, forget it. Okay. All right. Anything else before Mr. Desmarais just brings us through again? S16. I mean, what I'm feeling is I'd like to be able to move a couple things before town meeting, just so it doesn't all queue up for when we get back. But it does feel good that we do have a little bit of a cushion there. But I also know H81 will take time. I'm eager to hear what the pro tem wants to do on the waiting study and other things will be coming our way, one of which will be coming from Senate Agriculture, which is their work on school lunches. And we just want to make sure that we give that. I have a feeling it'll be in pretty good shape, but Senator Lyons and I may want to, since we have the opportunity to attach something to an ag bill, we may want to just work together and do a few things. Mr. Desmarais, thanks for sticking with us. Mr. Jim, has your daughter arrived? Everything's good? She's in London?
She's in London, yes. Thanks for asking. Yeah.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Good. All right.
So let me share the screen again and pull this up for you. We're doing what? 16, yeah. Okay. 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 Can people see that?
Yes. Let me get my copy.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm just going to go through the changes here. So first of all, we changed the name of the task force to Task Force on School Exclusionary Discipline Reform. And then we had said include balanced representation of public and approved. Now we're saying representation. And then we'll come on to this, the prohibition on expulsion for students who are under 8 years of age. This is in the duties of the task force. And one of the duties is to recommend additional or more uniform in-school services that should be available too. Then I just broke this out to focus a little bit on what do you do when you can't exclude or expel these students, and then what about all of the students? So that just highlights for the task force we need to focus on this as a separate item, if you will.
Jim, I'm sorry, that's on what page, that last bit?
That is on page, we're on page, it's not page number, what is that? That will be on page 5.
Page 5. Okay, thank you.
At the bottom. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yep. And then we took out, you had in here before a subdivision that dealt with coming up with definitions. around data collection and whatnot. And that was taken out from your last meeting. So that's been deleted. We did add here in terms of looking at data that the task force is to analyze the available data and data collection processes. So that's been added in. And then we added recommend changes to the types of data collected and the data collection processes regarding suspensions and expulsions as necessary for the collection of all appropriate data related to school discipline. That's new. So that was it there. The appropriation of $15,000 is for per diem and reimbursement. You have 20 members. So it's a big group. But also this appropriation is supposed to deal with any other expenses incurred by the task force. And I don't know what that is. So I'm not sure how to deal with the appropriation. So
Jim, if I may, and I don't know if I copied you on this, and I apologize if I didn't. I reached out to Steve Klein last evening asking that they provide us with a fiscal note. I think what you've done there is terrific because they said, their words to me were, you can vote it out. It's really going to be approach that will ask, they'll direct the fiscal note to approach. But I think what you've put it there is a great spot to start.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Then we go just a couple cross references here. These are very minor changes. And so that is the old language that we've been through before. Now we've got the new language coming in from Senator Rahm's bill. So section 6 says it's amending current statute, which is a statute on suspension and expulsion. And now it says, notwithstanding anything to the contrary in this chapter, a student enrolled in a public school who is under 8 years of age shall not be expelled from the school, except in the case where the student poses a threat of danger to others in the school.
Should that say to, I remember looking at this last night, should it say to themselves or others? I thought Senator Lyons' language.
Yeah, no, but I said that, but you don't want to send the kid home if he has suicidal thoughts or self-destructive thoughts. So I think that probably makes a lot of sense the way it is.
Senator Perschlick, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, well, I wondered about that too at first, but then I thought, well, aren't we leaving it up? Shouldn't we leave it up to the school? Because it's not saying that these kids have to be expelled. We're just saying that they could be expelled, but the school would decide if they pose a threat to him or herself or others in the school. But hopefully they wouldn't just automatically say, oh, there's a chance, so we're going to kick them out of the school. But maybe there's a reason that having them not be at the school is helpful for the student. And maybe that's called something else, not an expulsion or something, it's a mental health day or something else. I guess I'm okay with it, but I just wanted to make sure that when we say except in the case of the threat to danger, that's not saying such a student has to be expelled, right?
Well, also remember that this does not prevent a school from an out of school suspension for a student. So if a student is harmful to him or herself, the school can still suspend that student in school or out of school. I can't see why you'd be expelling a student for being a danger to him or herself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. So
Senator Lyons' point.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody is threatening other kids, then
one thing.
That's one thing. If the child is um, threatening himself,
Yeah. we
then
want-
it would be a different, it wouldn't be it wouldn't be a situation to expel. It would be maybe not even suspension, but rather some kind of identification of support services. Yeah. Probably in both cases, but
Yeah.
I think the word expel probably takes care of it for me. Yeah, I think the way it is fine.
Yeah, I'm inclined to support the way it is as well. I'm just looking for others. Senator Persnick, you're okay? Senator Hooker, Senator Chittenden, you're okay? Or your question, go ahead.
Oh, question. So the way I'm reading this is shall not be expelled from the school except in the case. Does that saying that they have to expel when they pose a threat to danger, and should that shall maybe be a may instead? Would that not still accomplish the same thing, but make it clear that they don't have to expel the student when they're a danger to themselves, but have the option to do so?
I think that's a good catch.
Say but may instead of except.
I had the same.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a great catch.
Yeah, that's good.
I feel like I just helped write a bill. That was a good moment.
Awesome. Awesome.
Anything else, Senator Chittenden, that you'd like to weigh in on at this point, since you're nailing it, you got it. And at Senator Persnick, is there anything you're holding back from us that you're waiting for Senator Chittenden to mention? Okay.
Senator Campion,
Yes,
just
please.
on point of poses a threat of danger, and how is that defined? And who determines what the threat is?
Well, in the draft, it's left to the school. Danger could be, it could be physical danger, it could be emotional harm as well, I suppose, but that is left to the school to determine in this language.
Does that feel okay, Senator Hooker?
Yeah, I think it seems broad, but that's okay. I guess if it's up to the school, they determine whether or not it's necessary.
Is the word harm better?
So I'm sorry.
Is the word harm?
Harm.
Yeah, I've posed a threat of harm.
Yeah.
Danger is something that may not have yet
happened.
Yeah, well, harm is the same way, but I think harm is pretty clear. You're going to do something to somebody.
We could say danger or harm.
Jim, you must have had a reason for putting danger in there.
I think it may have been used in the statute that we're amending here.
Okay.
So I think I did have a reason, but I'm not sure. Let me look that up. Yeah, so in the statute we're amending, subsection B says nothing contained in this section shall prevent a superintendent or principal from removing immediately from a school a student who poses a continuing danger to persons or property, or an ongoing threat of disrupting the academic process of the school. So danger was used earlier, so I picked up on that here, but you don't have to use it here.
I like harm. So that poses a threat of harm to self and others is what I know that judiciary uses quite a bit in some of the judicial language around, and we use it for around mental health, and when people are involuntarily or voluntarily admitted for protective purposes. So that's the only reason I use that. We use that in healthcare and judiciary together. Well,
Sense to me.
I don't care what we use here, but I do like the word harm.
That seems good.
But danger, the value of having danger is it does imply putting a bomb behind a wastebasket.
Mm-hmm. I just wondered if there was, some kind of definition of that.
Yeah.
And
Senator Chittenden also mentions, can we say danger or harm? I mean,
yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that okay, everyone?
Covers everything.
Okay, let's do that.
Oh, I'm on a roll.
You're on a roll. Okay, I think we can take that down unless there's.
Oh, we have more to go here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was a little ahead. Sorry.
That's fine. So we have section 7 right here. This is the only thing remaining, which is the referral of truancy to the state's attorney's office, state attorneys. It says on before September 1 of this year, each school district shall report to the Agency of Education the number of cases referred by the district or its staff to a state's attorney for truancy under 2 sections of law, which I'll come back to. What mitigation techniques were used by the district to engage with families prior to each referral and the result of each referral. And then you have a report on before September 15th this year from the agency, which collates the reports from the school districts. The references here, 16 VSA 1127 allows referrals to the state's attorneys for truancy because there is a fine of, I think it's $1,000 against the parents for a truant student if it's ongoing truancy. So the referral there would be for actually a fine for the parents. First, we say 5309 is the Human Services chapter, and that permits referrals from a school to the state's attorneys, really for at-risk assessments for the child. So if the child maybe needs to have another home or caregiver, that's what that would involve. So that's why those 2 sections are referenced here. And that's it.
So the state's attorney already has this information, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So this
Yeah.
is.
Or this is information from the school district about what it's reported. Yeah.
So, okay. Questions? So I think it makes sense to sleep on this, try to put it on the calendar for a vote on Friday. I have a feeling it will go to approps, and possibly the mention of state's attorneys may mean it also swings by judiciary. I don't know. But for us to move things along works for me. But I also want to get it right. So let's all take a look at it tonight, and please be in touch with questions or concerns. And now we'll move it, try to move it on Friday when we also move possibly miscellaneous ed and literacy. Senator Perchlik, any concerns? No, you're okay. Senator Hooker, Senator Lyons, Senator Chittenden. Okay. Thank you, Jim. You are the master at taking our ideas and doing something with them. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, committee, still sunny out down south. Hope everybody can get out. Thanks for everything, and look forward to being in touch.